Trump just tweeted maybe the most horrible thing that we've seen so far, and people are rightly pissed off. There has been a flurry of negative responses all over the world to Donald Trump calling Zelenskyy, the leader of Ukraine, a dictator, while at the same time refusing to say anything negative about his boss, Vladimir Putin.
Saying he's a dictator without elections is quite extraordinary, because I don't think that those are words he'd necessarily use about the Russian President Vladimir Putin.
This comes after Trump seemingly blames Ukraine for being invaded by Russia. President Zelenskyy was rightly pissed off about those statements, and this insane post seems to be Trump's retaliation. But before we dive into it, I want to remind you guys to like the video if you're liking the video, and double check that you're subscribed. For every sub, we snatch one MAGA hat right off a Republican's head.
Give me back my hat. Give me back my hat. Give me back my hat.
The people who are all in on the Trump-Russia collusion allegations of the first term are the most vindicated people in the world right now, because Trump has been absolutely throwing Ukraine under the bus during these recent negotiations that are taking place. The moldy orange we have as a president has completely lost his mind when it comes to working with our allies, and instead has turned his back on the Republicans' hatred for the Russians and has become something of an open Russian asset. This all started after Trump decided to have negotiations to bring about the end of this war with Russia and Saudi Arabia without Ukraine involved. And that went over with President Zelenskyy about as well as you would think.
The meeting comes a day after the US and Russia agreed to begin work on bringing the conflict to an end, following face-to-face talks here in Saudi Arabia, as you're seeing now. Missing from these talks, though, were any officials from Ukraine. Yesterday, Zelenskyy said he was surprised his country hadn't been invited to those talks, and reiterated a decision about ending the war that cannot be made without Ukraine. President Trump said he was disappointed by Zelenskyy's reaction and appeared to blame Ukraine for the war, even though it was invaded by Russia.
But today I heard, oh, well, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal.
And just a few moments ago this morning, Zelenskyy is pushing back against President Trump, saying he, quote, lives in this disinformation space.
And Zelenskyy's right. He absolutely does live in a disinformation sphere. Let's go through what he tweeted and then check out Zelenskyy's response. Think of it. A modestly successful comedian, Vladimir Zelenskyy, talked the United States of America into spending $350 billion to go into a war that couldn't be won, that never had to start, but a war that he, without the United States and Trump, will never be able to settle. The United States has spent $200 billion more than Europe, and Europe's money is guaranteed, while the United States will get nothing back. Why didn't Sleepy Joe demand equalization, in that this war is far more important to Europe than it is to us? We have a big, beautiful ocean of separation. God, this is like... Oh man, this is hard to get through. He's so stupid. On top of this, Zelenskyy admits that half of the money we sent to him is missing. He refuses to have elections, is very low in Ukrainian polls, and the only thing he is good at is playing Biden like a fiddle. A dictator without elections. Zelenskyy better move fast or he is not going to have a country left. Jesus Christ. In the meantime, we are successfully negotiating an end to the war with Russia, something I'll admit only Trump and the Trump administration can do. Biden never tried, Europe has failed to bring peace, and Zelenskyy probably wants to keep the gravy train going. I love Ukraine, but Zelenskyy has done a terrible job. His country is shattered, and millions have unnecessarily died. And so it continues. So there's a lot of misinformation and just general bullshit in this, and a couple of interesting things to note. One, Vladimir Zelenskyy did not ask for $350 billion so that he could start a war with Russia. Russia invaded Ukraine. We all remember what happened. And then on top of that, the United States spent $350 billion on American defense contractors and then sent that military equipment to Ukraine. It's not like America just zelled them $350 billion. When Zelenskyy admits that half the money we sent him is missing, what he means is, you guys said you spent $350 billion, but we only received $250 billion worth of equipment. It's missing in that you didn't send it. But Trump knows all about not paying his bills, so this is a very classic move for him. Speaking of Trump, how come he only references himself in all caps and in quotation marks like he's a brand? But that should be very telling that this man's ego has been completely warped into being some sort of weird God King thing. And I'll get back to that point later. But maybe the most egregious and offensive thing is this sentence right here. A dictator without elections. Zelenskyy better move fast or he's not going to have a country left. This is a very thinly veiled threat. It's not like Zelenskyy is a part of negotiations. He's literally being left out of all of this, and Trump has just given away all of his leverage to Russia. Then on top of that, it's rich calling Zelenskyy a dictator without elections when Trump is cozying up to Vladimir Putin, who just happens to keep getting elected because all of his opponents get thrown out of windows. And people are rightly reeling about these comments all over. Here's a piece from the BBC just absolutely stunned that Trump would go this far.
His comments are still pretty extraordinary. They're very long, but the fact that it's important to sort of first of all stress that Kyiv last held an election in 2019, has been unable to stage another one since Russia's invasion in early 2022. But saying he's a dictator without elections is quite extraordinary, because I don't think that those are words he'd necessarily use about the Russian President Vladimir Putin. In fact, I think that's something that has stood out with Donald Trump again. It was similar to his first term. He seems to criticize everyone but Putin. I mean, last week, Mr. Trump had accused President Joe Biden of starting the war in Ukraine. He wants to have this closer alignment to Russia. I think there was always an expectation that he was going to say something. He's in Miami at the moment on a business meeting, but it's not particularly helpful considering he's got his special envoy to Ukraine, Mr. Kellogg, in the country right now, holding talks with Mr. Zelenskyy.
People everywhere are rightly pissed off about this. This perhaps is the most blood-boiling thing a president has said in my entire lifetime. America made a fatal error in November. That's about right. Here's another one. I genuinely don't think Putin could have even imagined Trump falling into his lap on Ukraine quite so hard, and so fast as he has in the last week. Trump has been showing the American people and the world a masterclass in abandoning your allies and propping up your enemies, known colloquially as being a two-timing backstabbing bitch. Here's a great post from Mehdi Hassan. Put aside the nastiness of this post and the way he attacks Zelenskyy as a dictator, but says not a word about his pal Putin, and just focus on the way it is written. Would you hire this weird person to work for you? Would you trust this odd person to teach your kid in school? Take away the fact that he's a president. If any other person was posting like this, we'd be rightly sending welfare checks. People would be concerned that he's in the middle of some sort of psychotic episode. Here's Adam Schiff, the only representative that seems to be paying attention to this right now. Trump's sordid appeasement of the Russian dictator will go down in infamy. Not since Czechoslovakia has a democratic state been so betrayed by a Western power. Trump is trying to show the entire world that the United States is fundamentally changing as a democracy. He wants everyone to know that we are no longer propping up the rightful rule of law, but instead the new world order is strong-arm authoritarian dictatorships masquerading as democracies. And if you don't believe me, check out this post on Truth Social that came in while I was recording this video. Trump posted, "Congestion pricing is dead. Manhattan and all of New York is saved. Long live the king." I mean, he is playing in all of our faces right now. The congestion pricing thing is a different story, but it's insane that Trump is calling anybody a dictator while he has the gall to tweet, "Long live the king." If this doesn't sink his image, I don't think anything will. And at this point, taking to the streets and protest is going to be the only thing that's going to stop these people. I'm Tony Hinderman with Really American, and I'll see you next time.